Hello and welcome. My name is Lauren Blackwell, and I'm here with Ashley Bondurant and Allison Scheide. And together we developed a proposed study on the implementation of virtual reality within an anatomy classroom. Not that one. Okay. As a team, we suggested testing new virtual reality technologies in comparison to traditional learning with physical therapist assistant students. The purpose of this proposed research study is to determine if using virtual reality technology to study the anatomy of the forearm is a more beneficial learning tool than implementing traditional manipulatives. Our research poses the question, is virtual reality a more effective anatomical learning tool than traditional manipulatives?
So to begin, even before we started researching, we needed to know what's already been done. Who is already researching this? So we found a great study by Trullies, who studied the history of technology in the anatomy classrooms. And so they found out that the development of the PC in the 1980s drastically increased the amount of options that teachers and professors had, even just by implementing PowerPoint, which to us now seems very simple, but back in the 80s and early 90s it was very groundbreaking. Then the implementation of the World Wide Web and the internet led to easier collaboration between teachers as well as students. And then they also talked about virtual reality software and augmented reality software as being kind of the next frontier. Then cyber sickness is one area that kind of has to be talked about when discussing virtual reality. So Rettenbush and Owen research cyber sickness just to see, look, what is it? How do we diagnose it and treat it, and how do we prevent it? So they found that cyber sickness is really similar to motion sickness, but it does have some very distinct qualities that do make it different from motion sickness, and they really proposed trying to do specific things that would limit the amount of cyber sickness that people would get from using virtual reality software. So, all right. Then we moved into virtual reality in the classroom. So we have 4 studies on that. Hannah, Ahmed, Neen, Parapati, and Panatowicz, they used the Microsoft HoloLens augmented reality in a medical classroom. It wasn't anatomy, but it was more pathology. And they really focused on just the logistics of using this in the classroom. And then Ferrer, Torregosa, Torbala, Gimnaz, Garcia, and Garcia, they used a software called AR Book, which is an augmented reality tool, like a software that studies the lower limbs. This was in an anatomy classroom. And they found that students using this AR Book software performed better on their assessments, which was great. And then Han, Kasoka, Seongchol, Idukazu, and Kyoba, they studied virtual reality in an anatomy classroom, and they focused more on the motivation and satisfaction of the students, and they found that students were greatly satisfied when using this technology. Then Ferrer, Torregosa, and company, they studied augmented reality in an anatomy classroom, and they broke their students up into 3 groups: augmented reality, paper study guides, and video lessons. And they studied how long students were studying and how they performed, and they found that students in the augmented reality group studied longer and performed better, and the students in the video lessons actually spent the least amount of time learning the material.
When discussing the methods for our research, the participants included 20 physical therapist assistant students from Trident Technical College. These students were placed in 2 groups: the traditional focus group, TFG, which would involve using traditional model manipulatives of the forearm, and the VR focus group, which would use the virtual reality software and hardware. Data collection is going to be mixed methods approach, where pre-post tests for knowledge of the anatomy and attitudes about using VR and traditional methods. Students will be questioned about their motion sickness prior to the research study at the beginning of the term to reduce the effect this question may have on utilizing the VR technology. The materials being used for this research include the VR software platform Unity, the Gear VR with Bluetooth remote, and a Samsung Galaxy S8, and a 3D model manipulative that is part of a traditional anatomy classroom. There was also IRB approval through TTC. When discussing the procedure, several steps will be taken to determine the effectiveness of using the VR technology versus one of the traditional classroom methods. First, the group of 20 students will be randomly sorted into two groups, the traditional focus group or the VR focus group. The students will be then given a knowledge pretest about the anatomy of the forearm. All of the students will then be given a 90-minute lecture about the forearm utilizing PowerPoint and in-person lecturing. Following the lecture, the students will be placed in separate areas based on which group they have been placed. The TSG group will have a 30-minute time period with the traditional model of the forearm with a list of landmarks. The VRFG group will have 30 minutes with a VR experience, with the controller, and the landmarks will be labeled within the software. Finally, the students will be given post-test attitude and knowledge tests. It is of note that all of the students have taken Anatomy and Physiology 1 and 2 prior to being part of this research. The method of analysis will be quantitative data from the pre-post knowledge test to determine which method was a more effective learning tool, and the qualitative attitude survey to determine what was the interest and overall motivation of the method that they used. Analysis will be performed separately for each form of data collection. The results will help improve the student's curriculum in the future, depending on the results.
The opportunity to use virtual reality will be very exciting for the students. It is expected that the focus group using the virtual reality software will have a higher % increase in class average from pre-test to post-test than the group using the traditional manipulatives. The anticipated research would determine that the implementation of the new VR software increases student motivation and autonomy, as well as student mastery of difficult content. It is expected that students who use the VR technology will provide more positive results on the attitude survey. The focus group using the traditional manipulatives will have more neutral and negative responses in the attitude survey. The anticipated results indicate a more substantial pre- and post-test is necessary to calculate accurate quantitative data as to the effectiveness of the VR software. The anticipated results suggest opportunities for students to use the traditional manipulatives should be available if motion or cyber sickness occurs. The results would determine that the implementation of the VR software would be beneficial for the future physical therapist assistant students at Trident Technical College.
In conclusion, we see that instruction utilizing VR has been shown to be effective in teaching students anatomy of the forearm. Also, VR has been shown that students enjoy utilizing this method to learn anatomy. And finally, it is important to keep up with new technologies with our teaching methods. So what's next? We think that it's important that we look into the benefits of VR with different content and class settings. And also, we like to see implementation of VR throughout the college, at Trident Technical College, and potentially across the state.
All right, so we're going to move into some question and answer. So we've had some questions come up while we were presenting. So the first question is, how did we decide on using the Gear VR? So when we knew that we were going to be studying virtual reality, we kind of did some research on what was out there, and we saw the Gear VR being very readily accessible, so you can just kind of get that off of, I don't know if it's necessarily from Amazon, but it was readily available. You didn't have to go through any special avenue to get it. And it seemed one of the more affordable options, which was really important because we don't want the cost of virtual reality to be offsetting to the potentially great experiences that students could have. So our second question is, was there any research saying that virtual reality should not be used in the classroom? So we were not able to find any research that said that virtual reality was going to be a terrible thing, that no one should use it. But a lot of the studies did mention just the logistical challenges of using such a new technology, making sure that students are outfitted with the right software and hardware, making sure that our anatomy software is up to date and providing the most accurate information, and then also just being able to have alternatives for students who can't use the virtual reality systems. And then our final question is, do you think that cyber sickness would be an issue if you were to use virtual reality for an entire semester? So some people encountered cyber sickness right off the bat, and I could easily see it for some people kind of progressing over time. So the manipulatives, they're definitely not going away anytime soon. Virtual reality is great, but it's never going to replace a physical model, especially as we try to keep things accessible for as many students as possible. I could also see cyber sickness being more of an issue during like cold and flu season when people's sinuses are all kind of messed up and everyone's already sort of out of their equilibrium. So just being able to have multiple methods of instruction, whether it's VR and manipulatives, definitely keeping both around is a best practice. So thank you so much for tuning into our presentation. We hope you found it very informative, and thanks for watching.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.